Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, Julia. Good evening. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thank you so much for taking your time out for this.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, Julia. Julia, so I was going through your LinkedIn profile before, that's what I usually do before starting a podcast to get as much information as possible. I know that right now you're working full time in a school and you also own multiple positions. But that aside, uh, did you want to be a teacher all along? Is that what you planned for?
That is not at all what I planned for, actually. I started out going to university, the University of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, not really having any idea what I wanted to do, only knowing that I really loved science. So I kind of just started off on that path, pursuing a degree in biology, and chemistry. And about 2.5 years in to college, I started working at an after school program for high school kids in the area. And I really had a great time, like such a great experience doing that. And I was like, well, maybe I'll be a teacher. I'll be a science teacher. That sounds like a great idea. So I went to my like academic advisor at school. And actually the first thing that they said to me was that I was too smart to be a teacher. And that I should consider something else.
Right.
But that didn't stop me. So I ended up finishing my degree in. I have a degree in biology and psychology and a minor in chemistry. And then I headed to graduate school for education and went through a master's degree program for secondary education. And then that's what led me to where I am today.
Great. Julia, you said your experience during the after school program where you helped students that's what uh, was the first time that you thought you could be a teacher, right? You enjoyed that experience. What about it was so enjoyable for you? Um,
So I was working mostly like one-on-one with kids in the after school program, kind of helping them with homework and things like that. And so many times I was just met with kids that came in not understanding something and left understanding something. And it was just the best experience ever to like watch them find success and be happy and be like, oh, I can do this. And that feeling that I got from that was just the best.
got it. And you said, you're too smart to be a teacher. So what followed after that? What was it? Like you've done a lot of things after that. Uh, was the teacher thing in the back of your head, or how did that pan out?
So yeah, it was like a weird conversation to have. I come from a family of medical professionals, so both my parents are doctors. My older brother is a doctor, and I was a little bit worried that that is what they kind of assumed I would be because I also love science. And I was completely wrong. They were totally supportive of it. My grandmother was actually an English teacher, and so she was super excited about it. And from there, it just became figuring out like, how do I get from where I am now to where I want to be? And that was like finding the best fit of a master's program. I think I always thought it was super important to have a degree in what I wanted to teach. So that way I knew what I was teaching really well, and then have someone teach me how to become a teacher.
Got it, Julia. Julia, now when people become teachers, right? I've spoken to people, who've become teachers by accident and who've gone on to enjoy teaching. And I've met people who sort of planned a little better, while becoming a teacher. Now, I'd like to ask you this question, right? Because you say that you come from a family, your parents are doctors, your older brother is a doctor too, and that's a decent amount of money, if not a lot of money. And teaching is not known for a lot of money, right? And I understand when you hustle and when you become a teacher, when you set up a business, but when you consciously choose the path of teaching, does the thought of money come in? And if it did, um, does it help that you are clear that you want to become a teacher so that you can chart out a path that can probably help you take not as much as what doctors do, but at least in the world of teaching, you're not that, you're at least in the top 1%.
For sure. I mean, I would be lying if I said I didn't think about making money. I mean, teachers don't make a lot of money. And that was definitely in the back of my mind. But like knowing that to me, a fulfilled life was a little bit more important. And also knowing that I would put myself in the best position possible to make as much money as I could doing what I'm doing. So, that meant finding states that tend to pay their teachers more. That meant getting additional degrees. I ended up going back and getting a second master's degree because a lot of school districts will pay more for additional education. That meant kind of like putting myself in the best position possible to be able to earn, a livable wage doing something that I love doing.
Great stuff, Julia. Julia, thank you for sharing this because, you must have done a lot of research, especially after you decided that, okay, you know what, I'm going to be a teacher, but might as well plan it out better. So while you did your research, if somebody is listening from the US, right, and if they want to be a teacher, what are the things that they have to kind of, they can do right so that they end up in a place where money isn't really a problem as a teacher?
For sure. So, like, first things first is, I would highly recommend getting a master's degree. It's going to put you in a much better position. I got pretty lucky in that most of my master's degree was paid for because of my grades in undergrad. So I had scholarships for it. And then really figuring out in what part of the country you want to be in because it varies greatly how much money you can make in different parts of the country. And then from that, you also have to decide what kind of school system you're going to work in. And certain ones pay more or less depending on what they require. Are you going to go to a public school or a charter school or a private school? And then, in that area that you want to be in, locating the type of school that will get you. Because if it is something like a public school or a charter school, salaries are public record and you can look them up. So I could look up any public school in Pennsylvania and see if I have this much experience and this many years of education, this is how much money I should be making. So all of that is like public information that you can use to research.
Great stuff. And you said a couple of things, right? I mean, as factors to decide, what you have to do. One is the location in the U.S. So, talking about it, uh, is the region where you're located right now one of the highest paying school states?
Yeah,
School regions.
I live basically in the Northeast US. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Pennsylvania is known for having a great, education system and paying their teachers generally well.
Right.
There's a couple other areas too that's the case in Michigan and things like that. There are certain states, Arizona, for example, has a pretty low teacher salary.
Right.
And so, I'm lucky I've spent most of my life on the East Coast. And so that I didn't have to move across the country to become a teacher.
Right.
But for some people, if that's important, then, moving, I guess, towards the northeastern part of the US is generally where it's a little bit higher salary.
Got it, Julia. And when it comes to the different types of schools that you said, right, public, private, or charter, or whatever that there is more, uh, which one, what type of school pays the best?
Um, I'd say that totally depends a little bit. I've actually worked in all three. I've worked in a public
Oh,
school,
wow.
I've
Okay.
worked in a charter school, and a private school. And so it depends a little bit on what kind of teacher you are and almost like what you're willing to put into it. So, in general, the longer you've been teaching, a public school will pay you more money because they increase your pay every year of experience that you have. And that might not be the case for a public school or a charter school. That being said, working in a private school, you also have opportunities to grow and take on different positions that you might not have in a public school that could allow you to earn more money.
Julia, please correct me if I'm wrong. Did you say public school is the place where they increase your salary every year based on your experience?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. But, it just came out the other way, I guess. That's why I kind of had to ask you again. Now, uh, got it. I got to know the difference between these three types of schools when it comes to money. But you also said that in private school, you can take up a lot of other positions, or you can have your own business, which you cannot do while you're at the public school. Is that right?
Yes.
Uh, okay. And now, when somebody chooses to teach, right, it's not all about money. Money is there, but uh, but it's more to do with their interest. They really want to teach and stuff like that. So, as a teacher who's passionate about what they do, which atmosphere suited you the best? Was it the public school? Was it the private or the charter?
Um, I think the private school suits me best for where I am now, because it gives me a lot of freedom in the way that I teach and what I teach. I became a teacher because I love teaching science. I love everything about it. And, in a public school, a lot of the curriculum is kind of given to you, and you have to hit certain standards and you have to teach certain ways and you have to take a standardized test. And while I understand the idea behind it, the ability to kind of craft a curriculum the way that I see science and the evolution of science, that's been something I am so appreciative of that my private school let me do. I totally threw out the textbook and just went from square one, and it's allowed me and my students to have such a great science learning experience. So I really appreciate that. I would say though, as a brand new teacher, my very first year teaching, I was in a public school, and having that structure and curriculum was very helpful at the start because I didn't totally know what I was doing. So it really kind of has transitioned over time with me.
Totally. I think that experience in public school gives you a perspective of, kind of what is wrong or what can be different. So great. So, Julia, you also are, tutoring after your school hours. So, how did that start off?
Um, so it's actually an interesting story. Back in November, December of 2017, I actually had a position at a school, and I was extremely unhappy with the school. It led me to like a very poor mental health state. And I ended up leaving the position in the middle of the school year because it was not there for me. And trying to find a job in the middle of the school year is not super easy. And so I was looking for other things that I could be doing, until the next school year started. And that landed me on the door of Huntington Learning, which is both tutoring and a test prep company around, this part of the US. And so I started working there part time to make some money while I tried to figure out what it was I wanted to do. And turns out I really enjoyed test prep also. I had really great experience there. I learned so many things and also met some amazing other teachers and amazing students. And so from there, I worked there basically up until the next school year started. And then even through the next school year, I started, kept kind of working there part time through that. After a while, it was a bit of a long commute from where I lived. So it kind of became a little bit of a challenge to keep that up. And so I left there and then just started, on my own doing prep and tutoring for kids.
Got it, Julia. Julia, as much as we talk about teaching not be as lucrative as other things, do you think teaching is one of those professions that gives you an amazing, flexible, and almost an instant way to earn money by teaching privately and doing private tutoring, right? Like you just said, you just left your teaching thing in a school in the middle, but still, I don't think, did you find it very difficult financially, or did this just help you?
So I
uh,
will say when I was working for another company, it was not as lucrative of a position because when you work for a company, they find all the students for you, they do all the scheduling for you, they do all of that, which means, you're not taking home as much money, but you also don't have to do all that work. So that was, definitely not equivalent to a full-time position.
right.
Notably because the program also really only worked for after school hours. So you couldn't, work as many hours as probably you will want to. Once you are kind of out on your own and have the ability and flexibility to do all of that, it can become very lucrative, especially depending on how much time and effort you're going to give to it. For me, it has been an excellent way to kind of supplement my income to allow me to do the kinds of things that I want to do in my life.
Got it, Julia. Julia, you said you worked for the Huntington, and then because of the commute and stuff, you started on your own. Now, by the time you started on your own, did you find another full-time job teaching, or did you find your job after you started your own tutoring business?
At that point, I had started a full time job. So even when I started on my own, I did have a full time job. That job wasn't as demanding as kind of the position that I have now. So it gave me some additional time and maneuvering to kind of build that up while I was, starting in that full time position.
Got it, Julia. Uh, Now, talking about when you started off on your own, right? What was that experience like from an entrepreneur point of view? Now, so far you kind of built up your teaching experience and stuff. Now that's sorted. But from a business point of view, finding students, all that you said that the other company did for you, when you had to do it for yourself, what was your experience and how did you solve all the problems?
It was very scary. I mean, I should say a little less scary just because I knew I wasn't solely dependent on that income. So, it did kind of alleviate some of the time pressure. I didn't feel so strapped to be able to have to do those things. But it really happened a bit organically when I met a coworker at my school who had also done test prep. And we didn't know each other very well, but she heard through the grapevine that I did test prep. And she actually came to me and was like, "Hey, I do the English test prep. I heard you do the math and science test prep. We should get together." And so once the two of us kind of teamed up, we were like, "Oh, wow." We were kind of like a whole package. I have the expertise in the math and the science, depending on what test they're taking. You have the expertise in the English, which is not my forte. Like, we should, market this as a package deal, and go from there. And so that's kind of what we did. We made a flyer. We had to ask permission from the school that we could share it with people and families, and they didn't have a problem with that because our school didn't offer a program, and so we were allowed to do that. So you know it was a little bit challenging. We're like, how much money do we charge? How many hours? So it was a lot of planning sessions with this teacher to kind of come up with, we think it should be, 6 weeks, 2 hours each session. We're going to hold them on Sundays, and you're going to meet with these kids. And then we kind of like came through a game plan. And then, the finances came from like, okay, well, about how much do we want to charge per hour? How many kids can we hold? So there was way more decisions that had to be made than I ever anticipated. But it certainly helped to have her as a buffer to try to, bounce ideas off of and work together for it.
Got it, Julia. Julia, going back to the time when you decided that you want to be a teacher, and then you did a lot of programs, right? And you also did your masters. Now, was there a program that you did specifically to qualify as a teacher?
To be like a general teacher?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Correct.
So my first master's degree is in education, and then through that program, we have to complete a certain number of hours and then take several different, I think there's like 3 or 4 different exams that to pass to then be certified in a certain state. So I was originally certified in the state of Pennsylvania. I've moved since into different states, and when you move, you also have to take tests in the other state to kind of move your licensure. So I took those and kind of have moved it back and forth as I move.
Got it, Julia. The reason I asked you this question was, there are teachers, some of them who do this master's in education that you did, and there are teachers who don't. Do you think it makes a difference, apart from your certification to teach in public schools and schools? Apart from that, do you think it makes a difference as a teacher?
Um, I think it made, at least for me, a complete world of difference. I think it's very dependent on the program that you choose to attend.
Right.
The one that I went to was probably the most intense year of my life. We would we were placed in a actual school system and with a mentor teacher, and pretty much from like 6 weeks into the school year, like we were taking over their classes and teaching them and lesson planning, and then all that during the day, and then we would go back to the college at night and take graduate courses afterwards, and then go home and try to plan for the next day. And it was a super intense year, but it for sure made me the best first year teacher ever. I met so many other first year teachers my first year, and they were like swimming without life jackets, and I felt like, okay, I got this. Like I'm okay. It was really, I think, instrumental in my success as a teacher. It was really a great program.
Got it, Julia. Julia, you said you met other teachers in the first year who were like, like not sorted. And to be a teacher in a schooling system, you said that you have to kind of do certain programs, right, to certify and all that. So those teachers didn't do that 1 year program that you did. Did they have a choice? What was it?
No, yeah, so it totally depends what different states and people require and do, and I
Right.
kind of wish it was a little bit more uniform. I think it would make more people successful, but it's not super uniformed. I think, and there's even instances where a person that has no teaching experience whatsoever can apply for, an emergency teaching certificate and basically like get certified on the job as they go. And so, there's pros and cons to that. If you're in the need of a teacher, it could be a great safety net, but definitely those teachers don't tend to be super prepared for what they're walking into.
Got it, Julia. Julia, today as a teacher, it's one thing to know your subjects and teach, but then there's so much more to teaching and facing students because there's so much there. Like, for example, there are students who've got, learning disabilities. Of course, if it's a serious one, there are different schooling systems. But even in normal schooling systems, some students happen to have a certain amount of disability learning. And then there's a whole other personal thing that comes with the students, right? Do you think are you as teachers trained when you do all these programs? Are these taken into consideration, or are these some things that you need to kind of do it on your own, get prepared for all of these things? So how's that?
I think it's a little combination of both. For sure, the program that I attended had courses on how to help students with certain learning, differences, things like that, especially common ones, students that might have ADHD or, other things that could affect their attention or other things that can affect their processing, dysgraphia, things like that. So we for sure were exposed to that. Um, but there are new things that we learn about all the time, and how students, might perceive things differently, interact things, learn differently. And, as I've been a teacher for 10 years. And so I constantly am learning and growing with the kids and trying to learn how those things function. I had a great basis, but it also depends on your demographic and where you are. At a school I used to work at, 5 years ago, we had a huge population of students who English was their second language. And I didn't have a ton of training in it. And so I went through training courses, on my own. The school helped locate them, but, to try to learn how to best help students where English wasn't their, primary language. And, as we learn new things about students, I learn new things also. And I go to trainings all the time to, up my game so that I can be the best help for them to learn.
Right. Got it, Julia. Julia, you've been teaching for 10 years. Before you got into teaching, you kind of gave a roadmap or a career path, as you know, or not a career path, like a path in during the education, like what courses to do and how do you get yourself to be in the best position so that, you're doing a decent amount of money. Now that you've been in the teaching system for 10 years, right? You said it's a continuous learning process. Now, for you to keep getting better and not, get left behind, so that throughout your career you are placed well, what are the things that you come to figure out, oh, it doesn't end with that education that I did before getting into teaching? There is so much of training. Are there more certifications? How do you keep yourself right there for the best things?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely you got to keep your hand on the pulse. I think that was most truly evident, 3 years ago when the world shut down and we all had to become online teaching experts in a matter of days. I fully credit my school in doing an amazing job transitioning us into online learning. They were with it. They did everything they could to make it such a great experience for kids. They helped kids get internet who couldn't have internet and computers, and they taught us all how to use Zoom, and we had trainings. Like, they were amazing, but it still meant me learning how to teach over a computer screen, which was wild. And I'm pretty tech savvy, and so it was quite an adjustment. And then even when we did go back into school, it kind of made us realize, like, what an impact technology was going to have in the classroom. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, I got to get it together and figure out now what I need to learn as the next step. And so from there, I was like, well, gonna get Google Education certified, and went through like both levels of Google Education certification. I was like, oh, well, got to figure out how to do math online. So, went to, an ISTE conference to try to learn about that. And so every time something new happens, I'm up, in the internet reading and trying to figure out, where can I learn more about this? Where can I do this? This past year, um, this current year, I'm teaching two AP courses. One which I have taught before about 5 years ago, AP Biology, and then a new one, AP Statistics, which I've never taught before. So this summer, I spent 2 weeks at AP Institutes, learning best practices for how to make those students, the most successful they could. And so it's really, I wish I could say that, the school just tells you everything that you should do, but it's a little bit on you. You have to, just like any person in any profession would want to be up to date with the latest happenings. This same thing happens in education, and you got to look for those opportunities. Luckily, with the invent of all these Zoom things, the world is at your fingertips. You can attend conferences halfway across the world that you wouldn't been able to. And so it's really a great opportunity to always be learning.
Got it, Julia. Julia, you've been doing the tutoring privately for about 5 years now, and it's gone through its own ebbs and flows, as you said. So, how do you see that? How does that track look to you 5 years down the line? What are your plans for it? I'm asking you from a point of view that, are you very clear that, okay, I'm definitely going to be a full time teacher for at least a significant amount of time to come, but I still want to keep the tutoring business up and alive. So, how's that? Like, what's running in your mind as far as that is concerned?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, don't see myself not being a teacher. It's what I love doing, but I also really love tutoring and don't think I would ever stop. The number of students I see or the number of kids that I prep might ebb and flow depending on like the season of life, but I don't ever see that going away, notably because like I have a real connection to a lot of these students that I spend so much time with one on one, and watching their progress over years, you know, even some families I've tutored multiple of their children, all in a row. And you really kind of become part of the family. And that progress and that connection is not something that I see stopping. And so I will probably be a full time teacher 5, 10 years down the road. But I also want to keep up the tutoring 5, 10 years down the road.
Got it. Your answer is pretty clear, but I wanted to kind of, still um, uh, probe about. Have you thought about, having your own tutoring business full time and leaving your school job and then, getting into it? Has that thought come to you?
It
If it
totally.
did, how do you go about thinking and, what is it like? Do you still give that a chance? Okay, let me see.
Yeah, no, it for sure has crossed my mind several times when uh, you know, you can look and you can realize, oh, whoa, I could probably make a lot of money doing this if I wanted to. Most of my students have been super successful when they take the SAT or the ACT. I've had kids with perfect scores, I've had kids improve their scores by hundreds of points, like, all of those things. And I'm like, well, I could really do this if I wanted to. And I think mainly there's kind of like two things that hold me back from that. One is that in the area that I live, there is a lot of competition for prep. There
Right.
are many companies that are very successful with their prep, you know, companies. And so me starting my own in all that competition is a little nerve wracking, to kind of, give up the stability of a full time job for that. And also, I think it would make me a little sad to not be able to do science labs with my students. That's one of my favorite things to do. So, you know, I every so often I toy with the idea of like, I could start my own business. I could figure it out. But those are generally kind of like the two things that I'm like, that, like, kinda pull me back to, like, full-time teaching.
Got it, Julia. Julia, probably a couple more topics that I want to touch upon. Now, in the teaching profession, right? It's a profession where, of course, when you're in the school, you've got so much of your time blocked off. You're not going to be able to do anything else. And then, when you come back and do your private tutoring, also takes away a chunk of your time, right? Now, have you ever thought about, oh, teaching doesn't give you much personal time or for socializing and stuff like that. How is that thought, did you factor that in when you wanted to be a teacher, or are you pretty cool with the amount of socialization that you get as of now?
I definitely don't think I considered that at all. When I became a teacher, it didn't really occur to me. I think in some sense I'm lucky that a really large group of my friends are also teachers, and so we tend to have kind of the same time off. But for sure, I think there are times in the year that I get a little bummed that I don't have a ton of time to do things that I love doing because I'm a person like anyone else, and there are tons of things outside of teaching that I love doing. I will for sure say that I work better when I have a lot of things to do. And so, I don't do well with free time. And so I I kind of go with it as it is. It's there are definitely times, I would say, especially in the winter months when there's not as much sunlight outside, that I feel that a bit more than I do when there's more daylight, just because a lot of things that I like to do are outside. And so I get a little bit more limited in that. But I try to be mindful of when I'm planning my tutoring sessions and trying to kind of chunk them into areas so that way I still have some evenings where I'm not doing any tutoring and I can just enjoy and do other things. And so being I, I call myself a Google Calendar queen, of my calendar, and making sure that I'm being conscious of that when scheduling things helps me a bit with that.
Got it, Julia. But also, I just realized that socializing is nothing but interacting with human beings. And as teacher, you may not be like actively socializing in other forms, but when you're sitting down and teaching kids, yeah, I realized it's not very far from socializing, except that your style of socializing is teaching.
Yes.
uh, Julia, one other thing. Now, the pandemic was here. Everybody is pretty used to the online style of teaching and stuff like that. I just want your opinion on this and, what you think about it. During the pandemic, did you think that, okay, we could see schools going online completely, and things might go completely online, if not completely, at least 50% online, 50% in person. And but how has it actually panned out? Now, are we in a space where we are like, we are done and dusted with the pandemic and we are back to in-person activities? Or do you see a time in the future where there's going to be a parallel group of people who are going to prefer everything online as far as the teaching and schooling is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everything has a time and a place. I personally cannot imagine teaching all the time online, especially in science. I don't know how you take science without doing science, I that is, I guess you could send science kits home and, to do labs and things like that, but it's pretty challenging. I think there's this, at least I felt this fatigue from like looking at a screen and concentrating on a face for that period of time is exhausting. That's not the same as, sitting in next to someone and talking to them. I do think that for some students, online school can be a very helpful thing for them. Students who might be pursuing other things besides school, athletics or music or things like that, students who might have, a lot of social anxiety being in a room with those people. I think, an opportunity for, what if someone is sick and they still want to pay attention to class? Could they zoom in and listen? I think there's definitely places that, as we go on, that more and more of it will be integrated, but I don't personally see everybody going all computer based education. I think, we kind of have in education seen a deficit in kids that, you know, went through very instrumental parts of their years learning online. And I think that, hopefully coming back into person and having those interactions with people will be beneficial. My school now even has had a huge push to get phones out of the classroom. The kids have to give them in every single time they enter a classroom. And it has really changed kids in the way that they just talk to each other on a regular basis. And it's been really helpful. And so yeah, I think, like I said, there's a time and a place, and it can certainly be great for certain people, but across the board, I don't really see that happening.
Got it, Julia. Julia, here's another question for you, right? Now, you're a teacher. You knowledge isn't a problem. You've got so much to share with students and stuff like that. And you know that there is this entire culture in the internet where people create courses, they sell the courses, and then they conduct programs, workshops, and all that sort of things. Um, I mean, it doesn't. Money is a consequence of it, but then people are doing some great job out there. Now, my question to you is, as a teacher, I'm sure you might have seen and thought about all of these things, but you do have a full-time job and stuff like that. Your times are packed and everything. But in the side, if you think about a course that you spend limited time on, but then it sells itself multiple times, it seems very lucrative, right? Now, as a teacher, what kind of support do you think you can get from people around you as businesses to kind of, start this parallel track? I'm assuming that you might be interested to do this. So if you're interested, what is the kind of support that you'd be looking for, or what are you lacking at this point?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I see it all the time. Teachers pay teachers is a huge, entity, and I buy things from teachers pay teachers to help me teach all the time. There's amazing things on there, and I think, you know, I've definitely thought, oh, should I just kind of package this what I'm doing and try to sell it? And the answer is I've thought about it a bunch actually, and then there are a couple things that hold me back that maybe, I need to think through a little bit more. One being, I do worry about, have I accidentally copyrighted something,
Right.
as I've gone through, and I would never want to claim someone else's work as my own if, over the course I've, pulled things. And so I try to be very conscious of that. And the other thing is these websites have so many materials in them, and people aren't going to buy them unless there's reviews about them. I'm not going to buy a lesson unless I see that it has 5-star reviews, because I don't want to spend my money on it. And so figuring out how to traction your things to be able to get those reviews is something that I tried to figure out and was not super successful in it. I posted something to try, I even posted it for free to see if I could get, people to review it and comment on it. But it's really, there's so many materials that unless you kind of make it your whole business, it's very hard to get stuff out there to teachers and to things. The people that are creating these courses have a track record of doing it, and you got to get your name in the game. And so I haven't quite figured out how to do that, but it's definitely a possibility because, like I said, I use those materials all the time, and I know the people that are good at what they do, and I look for their materials. And so figuring out a way to get your materials into that, list that pops up at the top, that's the key to some of those things. And, if someone could figure out for me how to do that, I'd, love to do that.
Got it, Julia. Thank you for sharing that. Julia, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You know, Thank you for candidly sharing a lot of things about your journey. And what I was thinking is, you said at some point you'd like to have your own tutoring business. So I'm already thinking about having a part two where you're at least 6 months or 1 year into your full time tutoring business, and to get your thoughts about that.
Deal.
Got it. Thank you so much, Julia. It was a pleasure.